3 people, 3 isolated roads, 3 nights that should have ended in tragedy but didn't. What I'm about to share with you are real survival stories from people who encountered something terrifying on empty highways and back roads and lived to tell about it. But this isn't just about what happened to them. This is about understanding why they survived when so many others in similar situations don't. This is about the split-second decisions, the instinctive reactions, and the psychological factors that separated survival from becoming another missing person statistic. Over the next hour, we're going to dissect 3 real encounters that happened on isolated roads. We're going to analyze every decision point, every survival instinct, every mistake, and every successful defensive action. More importantly, we're going to extract the universal lessons that apply to anyone who drives alone at night, anyone who travels rural highways, anyone who has ever felt that primal fear that something is deeply wrong. These aren't just scary stories. They're case studies in survival psychology, and understanding them could save your life. What makes these accounts particularly valuable is that they represent 3 different types of roadside threats. The first involves an unexplained phenomenon that defies rational explanation, but follows patterns that other witnesses have reported. The second documents a calculated criminal operation targeting vulnerable commercial drivers. The third reveals how predators use psychological manipulation and staged scenarios to trap victims. Each encounter escalated differently. Each required different survival responses, and each survivor made critical decisions that determined their outcome. By examining these cases through the lens of survival psychology, threat assessment, and defensive tactics, we're going to understand not just what happened, but why it happened, how it could have been prevented, and most importantly, what you should do if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. We'll identify the warning signs that appeared in each case. We'll analyze the decision points where survival hung in the balance. We'll examine the psychological factors that influence both the threats and the survivors. And we'll extract practical, actionable strategies that you can implement immediately to increase your probability of surviving dangerous roadside encounters. Part 1. The phenomenon when technology fails and reality bends. Our first case involves a late-night drive that transformed from routine to inexplicable in ways that challenge our understanding of how the physical world operates. The witness worked late hours at a rural bar approximately 30 minutes from home. The drive back followed a series of winding back roads through woods and farmland with minimal traffic, lighting, or population. This environmental isolation is our first critical factor. The witness had made this drive countless times and found it relaxing, a period of decompression after work shifts. This familiarity is important because it means the witness had established baseline expectations for what normal looked like on this route, making anomalies more recognizable. On the night in question, visibility was severely reduced by unusually thick fog. The witness had to reduce speed significantly because visibility was limited to only a few car lengths ahead. High beams were ineffective, actually making visibility worse by reflecting off the fog. This weather condition created both sensory deprivation and increased vulnerability. Reduced visibility means reduced awareness of surroundings. Forced reduction in speed means increased exposure time to any threats in the area. The fog also created psychological isolation, the feeling of being enclosed and separated from the world beyond the immediate visible space. Approximately halfway through the drive, the witness noticed a faint yellow blinking light visible through the fog, positioned off to the right side of the road. Initial assessment was rational, assuming it was a roadside marker or reflector. But as driving continued, the light maintained constant distance despite the vehicle's movement. It didn't get closer or farther away. It continued blinking at a steady rhythm, appearing to pace the vehicle from somewhere within the fog. This behavioral impossibility triggered the witness's first conscious recognition that something was wrong. Physical objects don't maintain perfect relative position to moving vehicles unless they're attached to that vehicle or moving in exact synchronization. The witness couldn't determine actual distance due to fog affecting depth perception. After approximately 1 minute of this synchronized movement, the witness experienced what survival psychology calls gut-level threat recognition. This wasn't rational analysis. It was instinctive awareness that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation. The witness decided to test the phenomenon by reducing speed, hypothesizing that if the light was a fixed object, changing speed would alter the relative positioning. But as the vehicle slowed to nearly stopped, the light maintained exact positioning and rhythm. This confirmed that whatever was producing the light was responding to the vehicle's movement in ways that shouldn't be possible. The witness came to a complete stop to further test the situation. The light stopped moving as well, remaining in the exact same relative position, still blinking at the same steady rhythm. At this decision point, the witness was debating between turning around or continuing forward. This is a critical survival moment that we need to analyze. The instinct to understand what's happening, to resolve the mystery, was competing with the instinct to flee from a recognized threat. The witness chose to remain stopped, trying to process and understand the situation. This is where human curiosity can override survival instinct, and it's a tendency that can be dangerous in genuinely threatening situations. Then the phenomenon escalated. The blinking continued at the same rhythm, but the light's intensity began increasing dramatically. The witness described it as like a flame catching wind and flaring up. It wasn't flashing faster. It was burning stronger with each pulse, as if whatever was producing it had become more active or aggressive. This escalation from passive observation to active intensification represents a behavioral shift that commonly appears in predatory patterns, whether human or otherwise. The increase in intensity correlated with the witness's decision to stop, suggesting responsive behavior rather than random environmental phenomena. At this point, the witness made the correct survival decision to retreat. The plan was to shift into reverse and turn around, but attempting to execute this revealed the situation had escalated into something far stranger and more dangerous. The vehicle's engine was completely dead. The witness was certain they hadn't touched the ignition or key. Modern vehicles don't shut off accidentally. The engine doesn't stop running unless deliberately turned off or unless catastrophic mechanical failure occurs. Neither explanation applied to this situation. The silence was absolute. No engine sound, no electrical hum, complete mechanical death without any action taken by the driver. This is where the encounter enters territory that defies conventional explanation. The witness attempted to restart the engine multiple times with no response. The starter wasn't engaging. No turnover. Complete electrical and mechanical failure. Meanwhile, the external light phenomenon continued intensifying, burning brighter and brighter with each pulse. The witness describes feeling that the phenomenon outside was somehow connected to the vehicle failure, which of course is impossible according to our understanding of vehicle systems and physical causation. Yet this correlation appears in multiple documented cases of similar encounters. Vehicle failures occurring in proximity to unexplained light phenomena, with restoration of function correlating to the disappearance of the phenomenon. The witness then attempted to use their mobile phone, intending to either document the phenomenon or call for help. But touching the phone revealed it too had completely failed. The screen was black. The device was dead despite having at least 20% battery charge minutes earlier when last checked. The witness was certain of this because they'd specifically checked battery level before closing the bar. Now the phone was as dead as the vehicle. Two independent electronic systems with separate power sources failing simultaneously without physical cause. This simultaneous failure of multiple independent systems is mechanically implausible, but appears consistently in certain types of unexplained encounters. The witness was now completely isolated. No vehicle mobility, no communication capability, No witnesses or help anywhere nearby. Complete vulnerability on an isolated road with an intensifying unknown phenomenon. The psychological impact of this realization cannot be overstated. The security and capability that a functioning vehicle and communication device provide was gone. The witness was reduced to being a stationary, observable target with no defensive options beyond physical flight on foot, which would mean abandoning the vehicle and entering complete darkness in unfamiliar terrain. Then the phenomenon reached its climax. The light suddenly flared to what the witness describes as blinding brightness, comparable to an exploding star. The intensity was physically painful. The witness couldn't keep eyes open and was forced to shield their face with their arms. The witness describes feeling the heat or intensity of this massive light source for at least 10 seconds. And then, without transition or warning, it was completely gone. Not fading, not moving away. Simply ceasing to exist as if it had never been there. The fog remained, but the light source had vanished entirely. Witness instinctively tried the vehicle ignition again, and this time the engine started normally. No hesitation, no difficulty. Full function restored as if nothing had ever been wrong. The witness immediately drove away from the location, maintaining focus on the road ahead, and completed the journey home without further incident. The phenomenon never returned. The vehicle and phone functioned normally afterward. Nothing about the car's mechanical or electrical systems suggested any problem had occurred. Let's analyze the survival factors in this encounter. First, the witness correctly recognized anomalous behavior early. The light maintaining position relative to the moving vehicle was identified as wrong within about 1 minute of first noticing it. This early recognition is critical. Second, the witness tested the situation by varying speed and eventually stopping, which confirmed the anomalous nature rather than allowing rationalization and dismissal. Third, when escalation occurred with the intensifying light, the witness made the immediate decision to retreat. Fourth, when vehicle failure prevented retreat, the witness attempted alternative communication rather than passively accepting the situation. Fifth, when all technological systems failed, the witness maintained awareness rather than panicking or fleeing blindly. Sixth, when the phenomenon ended and vehicle function restored, the witness immediately utilized that opportunity to leave the area rather than remaining to investigate or process what had happened. What can we learn from this case for practical survival application? First, trust early recognition of anomalous behavior. When something doesn't make physical sense, when behavior violates your understanding of how things should work, that recognition is valuable information even if you can't explain what you're seeing. Don't rationalize away impossible behavior. Second, test suspicious situations when you can do so safely. The witness's decision to vary speed and eventually stop provided confirmation that the phenomenon was responding to the vehicle rather than being a fixed environmental feature. This information, while disturbing, was valuable for understanding the threat. Third, have a retreat plan and be prepared to execute it immediately when escalation occurs. The witness recognized intensification as a threat signal and acted on it without hesitation. Fourth, understand that technological systems can fail in ways that seem impossible. Whether the cause is natural phenomena we don't understand, deliberate interference by sophisticated criminals using jamming technology, or something else entirely, the possibility of simultaneous system failure means you cannot rely entirely on vehicle and communication technology for safety. Fifth, when systems fail, maintain psychological composure rather than panicking. Panic reduces cognitive function and prevents effective response. The witness remained conscious and aware throughout the encounter despite the extreme stress. Sixth, when opportunity for escape appears, use it immediately without hesitation. The witness didn't waste time investigating why the vehicle suddenly worked again. The priority was leaving the area. This case also raises questions about phenomena that exist outside our current scientific framework. The simultaneous failure of multiple independent systems. The the correlation between the external phenomenon and the technological failures, the responsive behavior of the light source, the complete restoration of function upon disappearance of the phenomenon. These elements appear in multiple documented cases from credible witnesses, including law enforcement officers and commercial pilots. While we don't have explanations that satisfy scientific standards, the pattern suggests something real is occurring in these encounters, whether it's natural phenomena we don't yet understand or something else entirely. Part 2. The Hunters' Organized Crime on Desert HIGHWAS. Our second case involves a completely different type of threat. This wasn't unexplained phenomena. This was calculated human predation targeting commercial vehicles for cargo theft. The witness was a long-haul truck driver with years of experience, operating on a cross-state route making sequential deliveries. The specific night in question involved a desert highway segment with minimal traffic, no towns for miles, no gas stations, barely any artificial lighting. Just a two-lane road cutting through open desert under natural starlight. This environmental isolation is tactically significant. These weren't random circumstances. Cargo thieves select operating areas based on specific criteria that maximize success probability while minimizing risk of interference or capture. The witness first noticed a dark SUV trailing the truck approximately 1 hour before the intended next delivery stop. The SUV wasn't following aggressively or obviously. It maintained substantial distance but was definitely following. Most critically, it matched speed changes exactly. When the truck accelerated, the SUV accelerated. When the truck slowed, the SUV slowed. This speed synchronization continued for nearly 40 miles. The SUV never attempted to pass despite multiple passing zones. It simply maintained that consistent gap, always visible in the truck's mirrors, always present. Let's pause here to analyze what was actually happening from a tactical perspective. The SUV occupants were engaged in what security professionals call surveillance and intelligence gathering. They were assessing multiple factors about the target. Is the driver alone or are there passengers? Does the driver notice being followed? How does the driver respond to being followed? Is the driver communicating with anyone? What's the driver's level of vigilance and awareness? Are there opportunities to force the truck off the road or corner it in isolated locations? All of this assessment was occurring during that 40-mile pursuit. The consistent distance was deliberate, close enough to maintain visual contact and observe the target, far enough to avoid triggering immediate defensive response or providing identifying details if the driver called law enforcement. The witness initially tried to rationalize the situation, hypothesizing that perhaps the SUV driver was nervous about passing a large truck. But this theory was contradicted by the vehicle's failure to pass through multiple designated passing zones. The witness continued trying to ignore the situation, focusing on the job and delivery schedule. But unconscious threat recognition was occurring. The witness describes being irritated and disturbed by the following vehicle, checking mirrors repeatedly, unable to dismiss the situation despite attempting to do so. This tension between rational dismissal and instinctive threat recognition is common and important. The conscious mind wants to rationalize and explain away concerning behavior. The unconscious threat detection system that evolved over millions of years recognizes predatory patterns and creates emotional responses designed to motivate defensive action. Around 2 in the morning, the witness made a decision to pull off at a small roadside rest area. This wasn't a full truck stop with services and security. It was just a dirt lot with faded parking spaces and a small shed containing vending machines. Critically, there was virtually no lighting in the lot except one dim flickering bulb above the vending machines. The witness's stated intention was to stretch, attempt to get a drink from the machines, and allow the following vehicle to pass and continue on its way. This seems reasonable on the surface, but let's analyze the tactical situation. By pulling off at an isolated, poorly lit location, The witness was creating exactly the kind of vulnerability window that cargo thieves wait for. The location had no witnesses, no security, no visibility from the highway, limited lighting making observation and identification difficult. This was tactically advantageous for anyone with hostile intent. When the witness looked back before shutting off the engine, the SUV pulled into the same rest area, parking in the far corner of the lot away from the limited lighting. At this point, the witness's assessment shifted from confusion to anger. The continued following into the rest area confirmed this wasn't coincidental traffic. Someone was deliberately targeting the truck. The witness decided to confront the situation directly, exiting the truck cab and walking aggressively toward the parked SUV. This decision deserves analysis. Direct confrontation of unknown threats in isolated locations is tactically dangerous. The witness was alone, unarmed, approaching unknown individuals who had just demonstrated suspicious and potentially hostile behavior. The tactical advantage belonged entirely to the SUV occupants who had chosen the location, had prepared for the encounter, and potentially outnumbered the witness. As the witness approached, the occupants of the SUV recognized the confrontation was coming and made the tactical decision to abort that phase of the operation. The engine started suddenly, and the vehicle fled the parking area at high speed, kicking up dust and gravel, tires screeching as it returned to the highway. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the darkness. The witness attempted to see the driver or get identifying details, but couldn't due to tinted windows and speed of departure. Let's analyze this response from the criminal's perspective. They fled when confronted because their operational model requires maintaining surprise and tactical advantage. Once the target demonstrates awareness, confrontational willingness, and aggressive response, the risk calculation changes. The easy, isolated victim they expected becomes a potential problem. The witness, who seemed passive and unaware during the 40-mile pursuit, revealed willingness to fight when provoked. This changes everything for predators whose success depends on victim passivity. Part of the witness felt relief that the nuisance had departed and wouldn't have to be dealt with further. But another part, the instinctive threat assessment system, recognized that the situation had actually been confirmed as dangerous. The SUV occupants had been following for hostile reasons. They didn't want to be identified or confronted. Their intentions were clearly hostile. The witness was now alone in an isolated location that had been deliberately selected by potential criminals. This recognition of confirmed threat brought exhaustion and stress. The witness decided to take a short rest, reasoning that even if the SUV occupants intended harm, they wouldn't return because finding the specific rest area again in darkness would be difficult. This reasoning contains a dangerous assumption. The witness assumed that the criminals' level of organization and preparation was low, that they were opportunistic rather than sophisticated, that they didn't have the location already marked or the capability to return. These assumptions proved incorrect. The witness performed security checks of the truck and cargo, ensuring doors were locked and everything was secure, then reclined in the cab to rest. The combination of exhaustion and perceived safety resolution made sleep come quickly. The witness estimates falling asleep within minutes. Here we need to discuss a critical survival factor that applied in this case. The witness mentions being an extremely light sleeper, a necessity in the commercial driving profession. Sleeping in varied and potentially sketchy locations requires the ability to wake to subtle sounds. This heightened auditory awareness during sleep is essentially a biological security system. Threats to the vehicle while the driver is sleeping represent threats to livelihood and life itself. Therefore, the ability to wake to faint sounds provides critical early warning of problems. Approximately 1 hour after falling asleep, the witness was woken by faint sounds of footsteps on gravel. Despite being groggy, the survival instinct was functioning. The witness had the awareness to remain quiet rather than immediately reacting in ways that would alert potential threats to being noticed. Through a crack in the window blind, the witness observed 2 figures crouched near the rear wheels of the trailer. They were examining the lower latch mechanisms, clearly attempting to determine how to open the cargo doors without making noise. One had a small flashlight being used to signal back and forth to the other, indicating coordination and communication between multiple actors. The witness couldn't make out faces, but the intent was absolutely clear. These were the same criminals from the SUV. They had returned. They had found the location despite darkness. They were now attempting to breach the cargo area and steal the load. The witness had no weapon but was prepared to physically defend the truck and cargo if necessary. This isn't about heroics or property protection for its own sake. For commercial drivers, the cargo represents their professional reputation, their employment, potentially their entire career. Loss of a load due to theft can end driving careers. Therefore, defending the cargo is defending livelihood. As the witness watched, one of the criminals retrieved bolt cutters from a bag and prepared to cut through the locking mechanism. This was the moment of no remaining ambiguity. Criminal action was imminent. The witness made an immediate tactical decision and slammed the truck's air horn. Let's analyze why this was brilliant tactical response. The air horn on a commercial truck is extraordinarily loud. In the dead silence of an isolated rest area at night, the sound would be overwhelming and completely unexpected by the criminals who believed the driver was sleeping. The psychological impact of sudden extreme noise in a silent environment creates instant disorientation and panic response. The criminal's immediate reaction was exactly what the witness hoped for. Both jumped as if shocked, abandoned their tools and position, and scrambled toward the roadside brush. Within 10 seconds, headlights appeared from nowhere. The same SUV from earlier, this time with lights initially off, roared into view, collected the fleeing criminals, and disappeared into the night again. The entire confrontation and resolution took less than 15 seconds. The witness didn't even have time to exit the cab before it was over. The use of the horn had been perfectly timed and perfectly effective. It created maximum shock and confusion for the criminals while requiring zero physical risk to the witness. The criminals fled because they'd lost all tactical advantage. They'd been detected. They'd been caught in the act. The sound could potentially attract other travelers or law enforcement. Their identity might be compromised. The risk had suddenly skyrocketed while the reward, getting the cargo before police arrived, had dropped to zero. The witness called police to report the incident. The responding officers eventually arrived and conducted inspection of the truck. Fresh pry marks were visible on the locking mechanisms exactly where the criminals had been working. The officers confirmed this was a known pattern in that corridor. Cargo thieves following trucks on isolated highways, waiting for drivers to stop, then attempting theft of valuable cargo. The criminals had clearly been following for the 40 miles to gather intelligence about the driver's patterns and to wait for an isolation opportunity. The rest area provided that opportunity. The criminals had the organization and capability to return to the location despite darkness because they had GPS coordinates or had marked it during the initial visit. What are the survival lessons from this case? First, trust your instincts about being followed. The witness noticed the suspicious following behavior early and couldn't dismiss it despite attempting to rationalize. That instinctive recognition was accurate. Second, understand that pulling over in isolated locations when you know you're being followed creates tactical vulnerability. The witness's decision to stop at a dark, isolated rest area gave the criminals exactly what they needed. A better choice would have been continuing to a populated, well-lit location with witnesses and security. Third, aggressive confrontation of unknown threats can sometimes cause them to break off, but it's tactically risky. The witness's confrontational approach caused the initial retreat but didn't end the threat. Fourth, never assume that a threat that has departed won't return. The witness's assumption that the criminals wouldn't or couldn't find the rest area again was dangerously wrong. Fifth, light sleeping and auditory awareness during rest periods in isolated locations is critical. If the witness hadn't woken to the faint sounds, the cargo theft would have progressed further before discovery. Sixth, non-lethal defensive responses can be extremely effective. The air horn created massive tactical disruption without requiring weapons or physical confrontation. Seventh, always report incidents to law enforcement even if no crime was successfully completed. The documentation helps establish patterns and may assist in eventual apprehension of organized criminal operations. This case also demonstrates sophisticated criminal operations targeting commercial vehicles. These weren't opportunistic criminals randomly encountering a truck. They were systematic hunters operating in known territory with established methodology. They selected an isolated corridor. They identified a target. They followed for intelligence gathering. They waited for vulnerability opportunity. They had multiple participants with coordination and communication. They had tools and preparation. They had planned retreat routes. This level of organization indicates professional criminal enterprises, not random theft. Understanding that such operations exist and how they function is critical for commercial drivers operating in isolated areas. Part 3. The trap, engineered scenarios, and psychological manipulation. Our third case represents perhaps the most disturbing category of roadside threat because it specifically exploits human psychology, moral conditioning, and social instincts to create vulnerability. The witness was engaged in recreational night, driving on summer highways with minimal traffic. This isn't long-distance travel for practical purposes. This is enjoyment of driving itself, experiencing vehicle capability on empty roads. The witness had access to a high-performance vehicle and was taking advantage of empty nighttime highways to experience that performance. The streets were deserted, no traffic, no law enforcement presence, perfect conditions for unrestricted driving. At some point during the drive, the witness experienced what they describe as an insatiable urge to exit the highway and explore back roads, where the vehicle's handling characteristics could be better appreciated. This decision is worth examining. The impulse to deviate from planned routes, to explore unfamiliar areas, to satisfy curiosity about unknown roads is common and often harmless. But it also creates vulnerability by moving from familiar environments where you understand the geography and risks into unfamiliar territory where you don't know what's normal, what resources are available, or what threats might exist. The witness exited the highway and began navigating a network of back roads through what appeared to be a residential area. The roads were narrow with tight curves, exactly the driving experience being sought. The streets were completely empty. Just the driver, the vehicle, and the road. Then the witness encountered something unexpected. A shopping cart sitting in the middle of the road, not off to the side, not in a ditch, dead center in the middle of the road as if deliberately placed. The witness's headlights reflected off the metal bars, creating a sudden bright flash that caused emergency braking to avoid collision. Once stopped, the witness was able to examine what had nearly been hit. Just an ordinary shopping cart, empty, sitting perfectly centered in the road at close to midnight. On a back road through a residential neighborhood, miles from any commercial area where a shopping cart would originate. Let's pause here because this is where psychological manipulation and trap mechanics become relevant. Shopping carts don't appear in the middle of residential back roads by accident. Someone transported it there. Someone placed it there. Someone positioned it exactly in the center of the road. Why? The answer is it functions as bait. A shopping cart in the road forces drivers to stop or risk vehicle damage. It's unusual enough to trigger curiosity about how it got there and why. It's innocuous enough that investigating doesn't trigger immediate threat recognition. It creates a perfect scenario for forcing a driver to exit their vehicle in an isolated location, while their attention is focused on the cart rather than their surroundings. The witness made a critical decision at this point. Despite knowing that continuing would have been safer, despite instincts suggesting something was wrong, the witness put the car in park, activated hazard lights, and exited to investigate. This decision to exit the vehicle deserves deep analysis because it represents the exact vulnerability that predators using staged scenarios depend on. The witness's stated reasoning was curiosity, the need to make sense of something random and out of place. This is a fundamental human drive. We want things to make sense. When we encounter situations that don't fit our understanding of how things should be, we experience cognitive dissonance that creates strong motivation to investigate and resolve the inconsistency. Predators using psychological manipulation understand this drive and weaponize it. The witness approached the cart, noting the quiet night air, the absence of any sounds except the vehicle's cooling engine, the complete lack of activity or presence in the area. Looking into the cart revealed nothing. It was completely empty, just an ordinary shopping cart sitting inexplicably in the middle of a back road at midnight. Finding nothing unusual about the cart itself, the witness turned to return to the vehicle. This is the moment when the trap was sprung. Out of the corner of peripheral vision, the witness saw two dark figures burst from the farmland beside the road. They were sprinting at full speed directly toward the witness. The distance was close. The speed was extreme. The intent was unmistakable. The witness's brain required a moment to process what was being seen. This is called cognitive lag. When something completely unexpected and threatening appears, there's a brief period where the brain is trying to integrate the new information with existing understanding of the situation. During this lag, physical response is delayed. But once processing completed and threat recognition occurred, survival instinct took over completely. The witness describes the realization as life or death. The options were act immediately or die. No middle ground, no time for analysis or consideration. The witness bolted for the vehicle. This was correct response. The vehicle represents protection and escape capability. Getting inside and mobile again was the only survival option. The witness started the vehicle as the attackers reached it. One figure stopped a few feet away. The other sprinted directly into the passenger side door with such speed that there was no attempt to slow or brace for impact. The collision was described as a deafening thump. The attacker didn't flinch or react to what must have been extremely painful impact. The speed had been too great to stop, and the attacker simply ran full force into the stationary vehicle. The witness and this attacker locked eyes through the window glass. What the witness saw was terrifying. Beady bloodshot eyes suggesting drugs or extreme psychological state. Torn clothing indicating running through rough terrain or obstacles. Messy wet hair. Face smeared with dark substances that could have been dirt, blood, or both. Most disturbing was the expression. Not quite a scowl, but not quite a smile. An uncanny, vacant expression that suggested the person wasn't experiencing normal emotional states or reactions. The witness describes this as the most terrified they'd ever been. This was peak fear response. Critical detail. The attacker was bleeding heavily from somewhere on the body. Blood was spurting visibly, but the attacker showed no awareness or concern about the injury. No pain response. No attention to the wound. This absence of normal pain response suggests either extreme intoxication that suppresses pain sensation, profound mental illness that prevents normal threat assessment, or such overwhelming determination to complete the attack that pain and injury are ignored entirely. All three possibilities are equally terrifying because they suggest the attacker wouldn't stop due to pain, injury, or rational self-preservation. The attacker realized the witness was inside a locked vehicle and began fumbling with the door handle, trying to force entry. This action broke the witness's frozen state. The survival instinct that had been briefly suspended by the terror of making eye contact with something so fundamentally wrong was reactivated. The witness maneuvered the vehicle around the shopping cart and accelerated away from the location at high speed. The last image was of the two attackers receding in the rear view as distance opened. But the psychological impact didn't end with physical escape. The witness was conflicted during the entire drive home. Fear from what had just occurred was competing with guilt about leaving someone who appeared to be severely injured and might need medical help. This moral conflict is important to understand. We're conditioned from childhood to help people who are injured. to provide aid to those in distress, to be good Samaritans. This conditioning is generally positive and socially necessary. But it creates vulnerability that predators can exploit. The witness was debating returning to provide help but ultimately decided against it and called police while still driving to report the incident and request they send someone to check the location. Upon arriving home safely, the witness inspected the vehicle to assess damage. What was discovered was shocking. Blood spattered across the entire passenger side door, far more blood than expected from a brief impact. Blood streaked on the side mirror, smeared on the door handle, dotting the rear quarter panel, and a slight dent near the center of the door. The volume of blood was described as inhuman, far more than would result from the impact that occurred. This suggests the attacker was already severely injured before the collision, which raises disturbing questions about what had happened to this person before they were crouched in farmland waiting to attack passing vehicles. The next morning brought confrontation with the vehicle's owner about the damage. The witness tried to explain but was initially not believed. Only after getting the vehicle cleaned and eventually explaining the full story did understanding and sympathy emerge. But the permission to use the vehicle for night driving was permanently revoked. The witness believes they understand what happened. The people were likely homeless or desperate individuals who had placed the shopping cart as bait to lure someone out of their vehicle for robbery or carjacking. They simply weren't fast enough or stealthy enough to complete the attack before the witness could escape. The witness never heard back from police about whether anyone was found at the location or what happened to the injured attacker. Let's extract the survival lessons from this case. First, trust your instincts about investigating unusual situations in isolated locations. The witness knew that investigating was risky, but curiosity overrode caution. This is a common and dangerous tendency. Second, understand that unusual objects or situations positioned to force stopping in isolated locations may be deliberately placed. Shopping carts don't appear in the middle of back roads by accident. Disabled vehicles positioned at disadvantageous locations may be staged. People who appear to need help may be performing rather than genuinely in distress. Third, never exit your vehicle to investigate unusual situations in isolated locations unless you've assessed the tactical environment and confirmed no threats are present. The witness exited the vehicle with attention focused entirely on the cart, rather than scanning the surroundings for potential threats. Fourth, when threat recognition occurs, act immediately without hesitation. The witness's instant decision to run for the vehicle rather than freezing or attempting to reason with the attackers was correct and probably life-saving. Fifth, your vehicle is your primary defensive tool. Getting inside, locking doors, and achieving mobility again should be your first priority in roadside confrontations. Sixth, don't allow moral conflict about helping injured people to override your safety assessment. The witness's guilt about leaving an injured person was understandable, but the attackers had just attempted what appeared to be robbery or worse. They forfeited claim to assistance through their own actions. Seventh, always report such incidents to law enforcement immediately while still in motion toward safety. Don't wait until you get home. Report while you have details fresh and while you're still in the general area. This case demonstrates engineered scenarios designed to exploit psychological vulnerabilities. The shopping cart wasn't debris. It was tactical equipment deployed to create forced stopping points. The isolated location wasn't random. It was selected because it provided concealment for the attackers and isolation from witnesses. The timing near midnight wasn't coincidental. It maximized probability that any passing vehicle would contain a lone driver. The immediate aggressive attack without any attempt at social manipulation suggests these weren't first-time offenders. They had methodology and had executed it before. Their willingness to attack violently despite risk of injury indicates either desperation or psychological abnormality that makes them extremely dangerous. Part 4. Universal Survival (PRINCIPLES) from all three cases. Now that we've analyzed 3 distinct roadside encounters representing different threat categories, we can extract universal survival principles that apply regardless of whether you're facing unexplained phenomena, organized criminal operations, or psychological ambush scenarios. These principles emerge from the decision points, successful responses, and mistakes that appeared across all 3 cases. The first universal principle is environmental awareness and threat recognition. All 3 cases involved isolated locations with limited witnesses, help, or escape options. The fog-obscured back roads, the desert highway with no traffic or services, the residential back roads at midnight. Environmental isolation creates vulnerability by reducing detection probability for crimes, increasing response time for help to arrive, and limiting options for escape or defensive positioning. Understanding that isolation creates risk means you should be more vigilant and more prepared for problems when operating in such environments. You're not being paranoid. You're correctly assessing that reduced external security requires increased personal security. The second principle is recognizing and responding to behavioral anomalies. The light that paced the vehicle in impossible synchronization, the SUV that followed for 40 miles without passing, the shopping cart positioned in perfect road center on an isolated back road. All 3 situations involved behavior or circumstances that violated normal expectations. When something doesn't make sense, when behavior seems wrong even if you can't articulate why, that recognition is valuable information. Your unconscious threat assessment system has millions of years of evolutionary refinement in detecting predatory patterns and dangerous situations. When it signals alarm, pay attention even if your conscious, rational mind wants to dismiss or rationalize. The third principle is testing suspicious situations when possible without creating vulnerability. The first witness tested the parking light by varying speed and eventually stopping, confirming that it was responsive rather than fixed. This provided valuable information about the nature of the threat. The second witness tested the following SUV by noting its failure to pass through multiple passing zones, confirming it was deliberately following rather than coincidentally traveling the same route.